All right. If you would, turn to Jeremiah. Chapter 15 is where we are tonight. Nope, not too far. Jeremiah chapter 15. And we've been staying in the book of Jeremiah mostly, and not straying from that, but tonight we'll go back into 2 Kings for a short time when we get to it here in this chapter, just to build a historical basis, if you will, for what Jeremiah is talking about. So let's start with verse 1, and Jeremiah 15, verse 1. Then said the Lord unto me, though Moses and Samuel stood before me, yet my mind could not be toward this people. Cast them out of my sight, and let them go forth. The Lord is very angry and upset and wroth with the people of Israel. And when I say the people of Israel, I'm talking about the people of both nations, Israel and Judah, but Israel as a whole. And notice here he mentions, though Moses and Samuel. He picks two of their most famous prophets and men who were great leaders in their past, men that even today, you talk to Jews and they look up to Moses and Samuel and David even, and David probably more than any of them, but Moses definitely would be right up there, and even Samuel. But the Lord says, though these two men stood before me, in other words, they followed the Lord in what they did. They were faithful to the Lord. He says, even though your forefathers were faithful to me, he says, yet my mind could not be toward this people. In other words, I don't want to even think about you right now. That's how bad it has gotten. He says, cast them out of my sight and let them go forth. In other words, just get rid of them. I don't want to see them anymore. That's gotten pretty bad. When we put it on human terms, when a man loves a group of people as much as the Lord loved Israel, if that's not possible, I know, but just for an example, it's hard to imagine how bad they had to be to make him this angry. We think of it on our terms, even our own children, when they've made us angry, we get over it at some point. Maybe right away. Sometimes it may, depending on what it is, it might last a short time, but we get over it. But the Lord hasn't gotten over this. He's going to chastise them for what they've done very severely. Verse 2, and it shall come to pass, if they say unto thee, whither shall we go forth? Then thou shalt tell them, thus saith the Lord, such as are for death to death, and such are for the sword to sword, and such are for the famine to the famine, and such are for the captivity to the captivity. He tells them what's going to happen to them. They're asking, he tells Jeremiah, or if they come and they ask, where do we go? What's going to happen to us? Because once they figure out the Lord's gone from them, this is going to be a question they're going to ask Jeremiah. They're going to ask God's men, the prophets, where do we go now? And God says, you tell them. There's going to be some of you that are going to die. There's some of them are going to actually die. They're not going to be carried off into captivity. They're going to die in Jerusalem when the siege comes. Some are going to die by the sword. Some are going to die by famine. In other words, some of them are going to die in battle, and some are going to die when the army comes in and takes over they're going to slaughter a whole bunch of them just by the sword. And then there's going to be those that during the siege are going to die from the famine because they're going to run out of food. And then there's going to be those that are going to be carried off into captivity. A large number of them are going to be carried off into captivity. Verse 3, and I will appoint over them 4 kinds, saith the Lord, the sword to slay, the dogs to tear, and the fowls of the earth, or the fowls of the heaven, and the beasts of the earth to devour and destroy. So these 4 kinds of animals, or these 4 kinds of things here, not swords, not animals, but these are going to, he says, I will appoint these over them. This is what's going to happen to them. Some are going to be slain by the sword. Then they're going to be torn apart by the dogs. The dogs are going to come and remember what the dogs did to the queen at that one time, to Jezebel. And then the fowls, the buzzards, in other words, the vultures, are going to carry them away. And then the beast of the earth, whatever's left, the beast of the earth is going to get. And I will cause them to be removed into all kingdoms of the earth because of Manasseh, the son of Hezekiah, king of Judah, for that which he did in Jerusalem. So, because of what one of their former kings has done. So what did Manasseh do? So let's go back to 2 Kings chapter 21. And let's see what, let's go back. 2 Kings chapter 21. And we'll start in verse 1. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 55 years in Jerusalem. He ruled longer than most of the other kings. And his mother's name was Ebizabah, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, after the abominations of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. For he built up again the high places which Hezekiah his father had destroyed, and he reared up altars for Baal, and made a grove, as did Ahab king of Israel, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. Manasseh was the son of Hezekiah. Hezekiah, if you remember, was one of the good kings. He had all the high places and the altars and all that of the heathen destroyed, and had turned the nation back to the Lord. But Manasseh, and it doesn't tell us here why he names his mother. I'm not sure. I didn't go back and research her enough to see, but just on the surface, my guess is, if you look at some of the other kings when they came to power and it names their mother, usually it tells it tells about them learning from their mother, learning the things of the Lord from their mother. It doesn't say that here. Is these things what he did? Are those the things that he learned from his mother? I don't know. That's a little deeper than I wanted to go in this study, but anyway, we know his father, at least most of his reign, was a godly man. Now, he, like some of the others, he did turn bad towards the end, but Hezekiah had destroyed all those things. Now Manasseh comes along, and it says he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, after the abominations of the heathen. In other words, he went after false gods. He turned to paganism, if you will, whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. In other words, so when he says whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel, he's talking about those nations that were cast out of Israel, out of the promised land, when Israel came in, when the Hebrew children came in under Joshua, and took the land. These heathen that he's talking about here are the ones who were killed and run out of the land in that day. But Manasseh, for whatever reason, decided to bring their false gods back. If you remember in the stories of Joshua, when they first went into the land, they went in. They were supposed to kill everybody when the Lord told them to. They were to strictly follow His instructions. They were to kill everybody. They weren't even in most of the places. They were not to take any spoil. They were supposed to kill all their animals, destroy their crops, kill all the people, young, old. It didn't matter. That was the Lord's way of cleansing the land, to wipe out the paganism that was there. But for whatever reason, there were times, though, that Israel didn't follow the Lord's command, and they took spoils of war at times. And the Lord chastised them for that at times. But they still knew about the false gods that were there. There were people who integrated into the nation of Israel that had come from those nations that had been destroyed. And for whatever reason, they didn't follow the Lord's command and kill them. They brought with them their false gods, and the people of Israel followed after them. 2 Kings 21 in verse 3, he says, For he built up again the high places. In other words, he rebuilt the worship, the places where they had, these high places, if you remember from the studies in Sunday school, Brother Compton's been giving, these high places were originally set up to worship the Lord. But Manasseh, and there were other kings besides him that did the same thing, they rebuilt these high places, and they rebuilt them for the worship of false gods. And it says here Hezekiah, his father, had destroyed them. And he reared up altars for Baal. Baal was, in particular, and there again, at some point I want to do a study on Baal. I don't know when we'll do that, but this Baal is like the arch enemy of God's people in the Old Testament. You see that name a whole lot when it comes to false worship in that day. And here they had reared up altars. They built up altars for Baal and made a grove. When they would do these things, they planted trees around these altars, as did Ahab, king of Israel. And so he followed after what Ahab, the king of Israel, had done. Verse 4, And he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord said, In Jerusalem will I put my name. And he built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the house of the Lord. He built altars in the temple to these false gods, to Baal. Manasseh did. We also know, and we'll see more of this as we go through Jeremiah, that was going on in Jeremiah's day too. They had built altars in the temple and were even at times offering sacrifices on the altar that was designed for God, but they were offering sacrifices and worshiping Baal and other false gods. So Manasseh is where supposedly Jeremiah is going back to, and God is telling Jeremiah that this is why. It was because of Manasseh, because they had built altars in God's house in Jerusalem, the house that was called by His name, by God's name. They had built altars to Baal. Now back in Jeremiah chapter 15, are you starting to see why God's angry with His people in the book of Jeremiah? Because they've done everything possible to get away from worshiping God, the true God, the one who has given them everything that they have. They've got the land of milk and honey, remember? And in the beginning of Jeremiah, they've still got the land of milk and honey, But when Nebuchadnezzar and his army come, they're going to destroy the land of milk and honey, and it will never be known as the land of milk and honey ever again, because they've destroyed it. And it'll be even the armies and people that possess that land even after that, all down through the ages. It's just going to be desert and rocks. Verse 5, Jeremiah 15, verse 5. For who shall have pity upon thee, O Jerusalem? Or who shall bemoan thee? Or who shall go aside to ask how thou doest? Nobody's going to care about Jerusalem. Jerusalem was and the nation of Judah in particular, was a thorn in the side of all their neighbors because of all those years that they were following the Lord. They were constantly fighting at some point with their neighbors, and many times they would overthrow their neighbors. They never totally defeated them, but they would at least win enough battles to protect themselves, and it had become a very wealthy city. We've seen some of that in our study so far. It had become a very wealthy city because of the trade that went on there. One of the most wealthy cities in the world at one time. And these other nations around them, one of the things that drew their attention to Jerusalem was because of the wealth. They wanted a part of it. They didn't care about the city itself. They didn't care about the people. They just wanted the money, the gold and the money. And then there was also the fact that these pagan countries were jealous of the God of Israel, because every time they tried to fight them, every time they tried to conquer them, the God of Israel always saved them. And they were jealous of that. Over time and time again, God would prove through his dealings with Israel that the pagan gods of those other lands were nothing. And these people had grown tired of it. They had been embarrassed. Their gods had been embarrassed. All by a God that they couldn't see. Thou hast forsaken me, saith the Lord. Thou art gone backward. Therefore will I stretch out my hand against thee and destroy thee. I am weary with repenting. The Lord's tired. He's tired, not physically tired, but he's tired of what they're doing. And I will fan them with a fan in the gates of the land. I will bereave them of children. I will destroy my people, since they return not from their ways. And here again, he refers to them as my people. These are still his people. He's not talking about the lost ones that are in the land. He's talking about his people. His people have backslidden. And he says, I will destroy my people, since they return not from their ways. They have not repented of their ways. Their widows are increased to me above the sand of the seas. I have brought upon them against the mother of the young men a spoiler by noonday. I have caused him to fall upon it suddenly, and terrors upon the city. She that hath borne 7 languisheth. She hath given up the ghost. Her son is gone down while it was yet day. She hath been ashamed and confounded, and the residue of them will I deliver to the sword before their enemies, saith the Lord. This she that he's referring to is the city of Jerusalem. Oftentimes the Lord refers to Jerusalem as a female, and that's what this is talking about here. The city is ashamed and confounded at her people. Verse 10, Woe is me, my mother, that thou hast borne me a man of strife and a man of contention to the whole earth. I have neither lent on usury, nor men have lent to me on usury, yet every one of them doth curse me. The Lord said, now this was Jeremiah talking, and he says, yet every one of them doth curse me. The people have cursed him. Why? Because he preached the truth. Because he preached what God gave him to preach. It's an age-old issue with preachers. A man who preaches the truth, the world is going to cuss him. They're going to curse him because he preaches the truth. Even God's own people. Even in Jeremiah's day, it was God's own people that were cursing him. We have the same issue today. If you preach the truth, even some of those who are God's people, are not going to like what you have to say. So that's why the Lord encourages His preachers to be faithful and to preach the truth. Verse 11, the Lord said, "Verily it shall be well with thy remnant. Verily I will cause the enemy to entreat thee well in the time of evil and in the time of affliction." So this remnant that's going to be captured, that's going to be taken captive, for the most part, I mean, even though they're in captivity and they're enslaved, they're treated pretty well. I mean, they're not. Most of what we see as far as the carnage takes place in Jerusalem during the siege and right after that. But once they go to Babylon and are settled in there, they're not able to worship like they were used to worshiping. They're forced to worship some of the gods of Babylon. There's other things, but as far as humanely speaking, they're treated very humanely there. Other than they are outsiders. So, verse 12: "Shall iron break the northern iron and the steel? Thy substance and thy treasures will I give to the spoil without price, and that for all thy sins, even in all thy borders. And I will make thee to pass with thine enemies into a land which thou knowest not, for a fire is kindled in mine anger, which shall burn upon you." The Lord's going to take these people, they're going to be taken captive at His orders, at His approval and His command. Remember, He's the one that brought it on them. And they're going to be taken to a land that they don't know anything about. Like I said, I think it was last week I mentioned that they're predominantly a farm-based, agricultural-based society. When they get to Babylon, they're going to have to learn how to raise crops there, because it's going to be a different climate of sorts. Different things are going to grow there that didn't grow in Israel, and things that grew in Israel are not going to grow there. Same way with their animals. They're going to have to make some adjustments in how they do things. But they're going to go into a land they don't know about. And it's because, it says, for a fire is kindled in my anger. In other words, God became very angry with them. Verse 15, O Lord, thou knowest, remember me, and visit me, and revenge me of my persecutors. Take me not away in thy long suffering. Know that for thy sake I have suffered rebuke. For thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and rejoicing of mine heart. For I am called by thy name, O Lord God of hosts. Here again we have Jeremiah speaking again. And he asks the Lord not to forget him, to remember me. And if you remember, Jeremiah wasn't carried away captive with the main group. And so he was one of the remnant that stayed behind. And he says, take me not away in thy long suffering. There was a remnant that was left behind, and Jeremiah was kind of in charge of them for a time. And so this is what he's asking from the Lord. I sat not in the assembly of the mockers, nor rejoiced. I sat alone because of thy hand, for thou hast filled me with indignation. In other words, Jeremiah distanced himself from the rest of the people who were mocking God, those who were refusing to follow the Lord's commands. So he did not hang out with them, if you will. He didn't socialize with them. Why is my pain perpetual and my wound incurable, which refuseth to be healed? Wilt thou be altogether unto me as a liar and as waters that fail? Therefore thus saith the Lord, if thou return, when will I bring thee again? And thou shalt stand before me. And if thou take forth the precious from the vial, thou shalt be as my mouth. Let them return unto thee, but return not thou unto them. I will make thee unto this people a fenced brazen wall, and they shall fight against thee, but they shall not prevail against thee, for I am with thee to save thee and to deliver thee, saith the Lord. And I will deliver thee out of the hand of the wicked, and I will redeem thee out of the hand of the terrible. So the Lord tells Jeremiah, don't go back to them. Let them come to you now. So when they come to him, he's to continue to preach what the Lord gives him, preaching the repentance and preaching their sins, preaching about their sins. But the Lord tells him, I'm not going to let them harm you. They're not going to kill you. You're going to be, he calls it a fenced brazen wall here. You're going to stand boldly and do what I tell you to do, and they're not going to harm you. He says, I will redeem thee out of the hand of the terrible. Jeremiah is going to suffer some things during this time when it begins, when the siege begins. There's going to be times where he's captured, he's put in prison. They've told him not to preach. He'll preach anyway, just like the apostles did in the New Testament. We'll get to this at some point. There's a man that he's imprisoned with that will write for him, and that man will write a book for him, and so he's able to get God's written word out also, and but the Lord is going to protect him through all this. He's not going to be carried away into captivity, for one. He's not going to be slaughtered or died from famine during the siege. The Lord's going to protect him because he has a purpose for him. And what a promise, because, Jeremiah, if he just listens to the Lord, what the Lord's telling him here, he should know that he's now got the permission from the Lord to go out and preach the gospel and preach it boldly to everybody, and they're not going to harm him. You know what? He's got nothing to fear now, because God has made this promise to him, and God will keep it. He'll keep that promise. So we'll stop there for tonight. Continue to, if you haven't, start reading ahead a little bit, see what's coming up. Some interesting times coming up in this study. We've already had some interesting, but it starts getting deeper into what's going to happen, and so we'll pick up next time, Lord willing, with chapter 16.